Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Buongiorno a tutti. My name is Emilie Vandevelde, and I obtained my master's degree in educational sciences, and now I am a PhD researcher at the Faculty of Social Sciences at KU Leuven. And I am happy to discuss with you today our paper towards a comprehensive framework for pre-service teachers' civic competences. So let me first give you an overview of the presentation. So during the first few minutes, I will explain the importance of the construction of a pre-service teachers, of a conceptual framework for pre-service teachers' civic competences. And then I will elaborate on the challenges and the considerations that are associated with the construction of such a framework. Then I will briefly explain the data and the methods. Then I will elaborate on the preliminary results, and then there is room for the discussion. The bar below indicates where we are in the presentation. So first, we will look into the importance of such a conceptual framework. Okay, so we are all aware of the fact that in recent years, the ethnocultural composition of populations and of student populations has changed. And this gives rise to some educational challenges for education systems, but also for teachers. And the last decade, many governments and policy documents have recognized the importance of promoting active citizenship, and they have implemented civic education as a compulsory aspect of the education system throughout Europe. And so did Italy back in 2019. But to teach civic education, we do not only need policy documents or well-funded schools, we also need a body of citizens who are already functioning well. And it is in this regard, the teacher comes to fore. Because teachers are ideally placed to develop and sustain harmonious societies. So it is their job to foster the civic competences among their students. But to do this, teachers need to be trained, and they should be equipped with the necessary knowledge, skills, attitudes, values to effectively teach civic education. But unfortunately, at the moment, many scholars problematize the limited and inconsistent immersion of pre-service teachers in the field of citizenship. So teachers are not fully equipped with the competences they need. So actually, this is a problem that should be addressed. This leads us to the research problem. So in order to, in teacher training, specific attention should be paid to the civic socialization process of future teachers. But to get this going, we first need to know what civic education and teacher education should entail exactly. And we already know that there are many frameworks for the civic competences of pupils, of adolescents, and of adults. However, a clear conceptualization of the civic competences that are needed by pre-service teachers in order to teach civic education is still missing in scientific literature. So in this section, I will elaborate on the considerations and the challenges that are associated with the construction of such a framework. So first, we wanted to identify, we wanted to clearly define, civic education and civic competences. But many groups in society have different views on what constitutes relevant civic education. So there is no clear-cut definition. And the same problem occurs with civic competences. Again, there is a lack of coherent definitions of dimensions, etc. And this ambiguity also affects teacher training, because at this very moment, the preparation of pre-service teachers in the field of citizenship is quite confusing. And this confusion can be attributed to the fact that there are different goals, different approaches of civic education and teacher training. So the first challenge is the fact that the development of a comprehensive conceptual civic competence framework is a challenge because of the multidimensional nature of civic competency. And actually, both the civic and the competency are multidimensional in nature, entailing the attitudes, the skills, the knowledge, etc., that are associated with civic education. The second challenge is related to the kind of competences that teachers need to possess. So as I already mentioned, we need a body of citizens who are already functioning well. So this means that teachers need to function well in a democratic society themselves. But Schulman says that teachers also require specific types of knowledge. It is a teacher's content knowledge, but also their knowledge of the curriculum, pedagogical content knowledge, knowledge of learners, of the context, etc., that distinguishes a teacher who is effective at imparting his subject matter to students from just a content expert. So this means that teacher education programs should focus on the development of two types of competences. On the personal civic competences, so that teachers are themselves able to make independent choices for their own personal lives, but also the professional civic competences, so that they can teach civic education. So altogether, this leads to the following research question and the following objective. The objective is to develop a conceptual framework for future teachers' personal and professional civic competences. The first research question is which dimensions and concepts can be distinguished in a conceptual framework for teachers' personal civic competences? And then which civic dimensions and concepts can be distinguished in a conceptual framework for future teachers' professional civic competences? Everything that is related to the personal part is indicated in blue. Everything that's related to the professional part is indicated in green. So now I will briefly explain how we proceeded to build this framework and to answer the research questions. So as I mentioned before, many governments have implemented civic education as a compulsory aspect of the educational system. So teachers need to be trained in order to teach civic education. So in a first step, we decided to analyze policy documents, both at a European level and at a national level. At a European level, we analyzed the reference framework of competences for democratic culture, which was developed by the Council of Europe. It is the most broad-based and agreed upon guidelines for civic education for all educational levels in Europe. And it is actually the primary vehicle, according to the Council of Europe, through which civic education should be implemented. And they identified 4 dimensions of civic education, which are values, attitudes, skills, and knowledge and critical understanding. And within each dimension, they identified relevant concepts, such as valuing human dignity and human rights, civic mindedness, self-efficacy, etc. Next, also the Flemish, so at a national level, the Flemish educational context was analyzed in order to gain insights into the goals that pupils have to achieve. And this was all done by means of a document analysis. The next step consisted of a review of scientific literature. Teacher training institutions are actually institutions for higher education, and future teachers are between 18 and 24 years old. So we decided to review existing conceptual frameworks of civic competences for adolescents who are at the age range between 18 and 24 years old. And then 2 frameworks were actually most informative for the construction of our framework, which is the framework and dimensions for the heightened civic competence and engagements, and Tony Perta and her colleagues' assessment framework for civic competency and engagement. Subsequently, we also did a review of teacher education and teacher knowledge literature. And here, yes, these this literature was partly linked to civic education already. The first one is, and here also two resources were highly informative for our framework. The first one is the framework on pedagogical content knowledge. And the second one is the framework of civic education teachers' knowledge of Nogueira and Moreira. And this was all done by means of a systematic literature review. So to summarize, we mapped the policy documents to find out which directives are being put forward at a European level and at a national level. And then we also analyzed the scientific literature on the development of civic competences among adolescents. And we linked it also to literature on teacher training. But then we linked the results of this analysis back to the policy documents. And we did it in order to be able to identify relevant dimensions and concepts that are specific for this context. So actually for the Flemish educational context. So now we will turn to the preliminary results of this study. These are still preliminary because the document analysis and also the systematic literature review are still ongoing. So we will first start with the framework for pre-service teachers' personal civic competences. So based on the analysis of the RFCDC framework and the Flemish educational context, so based on the document analysis, we identified 5 content themes that can be addressed in teacher education. So the first is politics and law, myself and my relation with society, human rights, e-citizenship, and sustainable development. For each topic, we identified relevant dimensions and concepts. And I will give you an example of the first content theme of politics and law. So first, for politics and law, we identified 2 key dimensions. The first one is civic competency, and this refers to what pre-service teachers know and can do when it comes to civic learning. And civic competency can be divided into subdimensions. The first one is civic knowledge. This is the body of civic information that someone possesses, as well as along with the comprehension of meanings. And there's also civic skills, and this is actually the capacity of carrying out complex patterns in order to achieve a particular goal. Civic skills can be further divided into analytic skills and participatory involvement skills. And concerning the chosen concepts, I actually would like to stress the importance of the first concept, which is political knowledge. So for political knowledge, we identified factual, conceptual, and procedural knowledge of government structures and processes, stance of political parties, rule of law, legal aspects of voting and representation. And actually, why do we think that this is important? It is because now in the 21st century, many scholars emphasize the importance of attitudes and skills. But the importance of a solid political knowledge base cannot be denied because after all, if citizens do not know how political institutions work, for example, it is not surprising that they are not able to defend their own interests. Yes. So this is why we think it is also important to address this in teacher training. Then the second dimension is civic engagement, and this indicates what individuals believe and how they participate in civic processes and activities. And this can also be divided into 2 subdimensions: civic attitudes. And civic attitude is a mental orientation that an individual adopts towards someone or something. And civic participation and actions. So these are the actions someone undertakes in a democratic society. Civic attitudes can be further divided into motivations, efficacy, and civic values. And again, as an example, I will explain the importance of political attitudes. The political attitudes that can be fostered in teacher training are, for example, a sense of concern about social issues, feelings of political efficacy, and political trust. And actually, these political attitudes are considered as highly relevant predictors for political participation. And this is important because in Flanders, the ICCS results point out that Flemish 14-year-olds are hardly inclined to political participation. So this is why stimulating these political attitudes is also very important. So that was it for, that was an example of the framework for politics and law. And then the construction of the frameworks for the other content teams is still in progress. Now I will discuss the results for the professional parts. So also for the professional civic competences of free service teachers, we also identified 2 dimensions. The first one is professional knowledge and skills. And this refers to teachers' knowledge about pedagogical approaches, resources, the contents. But not only the knowledge, but pre-service teachers should also be able to implement this while teaching civic education. The concepts that are chosen here are, for example, building connections with parents, family, or involving students in civic-related activities in class. So teachers do not only need to have the knowledge of this, but they should also be able to implement this in teacher education. And then the second dimension is the professional beliefs. And these are beliefs about teaching civic education. And here, for example, it is civic education ideology, or another professional belief that is related to civic education is the opinion on how the presence of students' socioeconomic backgrounds can also impact the teaching of civic education. Also, another professional belief is, for instance, the confidence to teach civic education. So also this framework for the professional civic competences is also still in progress. So then some concluding remarks. I would like to finish this presentation with some concluding remarks. So first we constructed a conceptual framework for pre-service teacher civic competences. And we actually did this because we wanted to assess the civic competences of future teachers in teacher training. But of course, to be able to do this, we first needed to carefully clarify what civic education in teacher training should look like in Flanders. So this is actually the first reason why we built this framework. It is to build a survey to be able to assess the civic competences of pre-service teachers. And consequently, our framework is now suitable for the Flemish educational context because we wanted to assess the civic competences of Flemish pre-service teachers. However, the method that we use to build this framework can also be used to create such a framework that is suitable for the Italian context as well. After all, both Flanders and Italy are in the midst of educational reform, and both countries have implemented civic education as a compulsory part of the educational system. So also in Italy, teachers need to be well equipped to do so. So for the construction of a conceptual framework suitable for Italy, this block here can be changed to the Italian educational context. And I think this would be an interesting exercise, after which when the constructs and dimensions are chosen for Italy, maybe these concepts and dimensions can be compared with the Flemish educational context. So thank you for your attention, and I think now we can move on to the discussion, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Emilie. Please, we already have one.
yes. Thank you so much for this. Can I go? Yeah. Thank you so much for this work. It's amazing because this kind of work, it's, as you said, it's not relevant just for your country. It is very relevant, and not just even for Italy. This is something that the European Union needs. So in Germany, I worked in Germany for several years for an organization called Teach First Deutschland. Now I'm working for Teach for Italy, and it's part of the global network Teach for All. And we really focus, among other aspects, on this. Mm-hmm. Of course, we don't have a systematic framework, the solidity that you are aiming to. So for organizations like my organization on at least European level, that would be an amazing opportunity. And even if I am just working for the Italian organization, I can already tell you, if you need help in terms of collaboration, in terms of networking with other countries, I can provide this. I'm sure that colleagues throughout Europe might be very interested in this. And second, I wanted to ask you, well, you already delivered a question and the answer to this question, but though, why do you think is relevant, not just for your country, but why it is relevant to have civic education? For whom is it relevant? Is it relevant for a country? Is it relevant for the citizens? For whom is that relevant? The first question. The second question is, you said, in order for such a framework to work properly, we need a body of citizens that are already at least sharing a certain basic values, let's say like that, let's frame it like that. And what happened if it was not the case? If we were within Europe in regions where this kind of values are not necessarily a common vision, a common shared view. I stop here because I would have several other questions, but I think it's enough for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for offering your help in the first place. And also thank you for the interesting questions. I think these are questions that could be rather philosophical in nature, actually. Regarding your first question, or wait, your first question was about the why is it relevant, not just for a country? Well, I think civic education is important to live together. Like, I think, to me, one important aspect to be able to live together is multi-perspectivity, for example. And I just take this as an example. I think if one doesn't possess the competences like empathy or or being interested in the lives of someone else, or into what drives someone else, or to know what is the rationale behind someone's actions. If you do not possess this, I think many conflicts occur. And so in this way, I think civic education is really relevant, so that we are able to live together and understand each other and not just live in our own bubble. So actually, I also think that this is a really personal question, because this is how I perceive the importance of civic education. And I'm sure that someone else here can give many other arguments, but this is for me personal. And then your second question was, can you repeat it just a second?
Good question. My second question was, what happened if... Sorry, I'm messing everything up as usual. at the beginning of your presentation, one of the premises was we need a body of citizens that are, well, you said functioning. I don't really personally like this expression, but I reframed saying we need a body of citizens that share common values, at least, okay?
Yes.
In order for civic education to work and to reach the goals that we place in the framework. What happened in, let's say, a region where the body of citizens do not share a common vision? Is it not possible then to have civic education, or what kind of civic education can we provide, or what is it, a short circuit?
Yeah, so actually
it's not just a theoretical question, I tell you.
No, so actually the question is if the body of citizens in a specific country does not have common values, can we still teach civic education? I think that it is okay if there is not a common values base actually, and this is also what is interesting in a society, that we do not have the same values, and like this conflicts can occur, and that I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. And when there are no common values, this is just input for debate, I think, and then we can learn from each other as well. So I think then civic education should make use of these conflicting values, and I think that then that is the starting point of civic education. So okay, we do not have the same values. How can we still live together then? And I think then that is a goal of civic education.
Thank you.
I think that's a very good answer for the personal competences, but also that's why we also included the professional competences. Our idea is that even without the personal civic competences, a teacher should be professionally well equipped to teach civic education and to prepare students for democracy. So I think that's why also that professional part is so important in the framework. So even when we don't agree, a teacher should have his or her professionalization, should be professional in teaching civic education. So even without having maybe the personal competences to be a good citizen. So I think really that complements your answer to the personal dimension.
And maybe I can give just a small example of, for example, the ideology someone has. A teacher can be right-wing or left-wing oriented, and this should make no difference when they teach civic education. A right-wing oriented teacher should also be able to teach civic education, as does a left-wing oriented teacher. So this again explains the importance of these professional competences.
Yes, thank you, Emilie. Emilie is my colleague also, so I wanted to ask a question. You talked about, civic competences, and I was interested in, like, are you also going to advise teacher training programs on what levels in these civic competences teachers should achieve? For example, you speak about they should have some sort of sense of political trust, but is it maybe, should they think about it? Should they have like a conceptualization of trust and make up their own mind whether they trust? Or should they reach a certain level of trust in order to really be effectively teaching these competences to the students? Mm-hmm. So what is your idea about this?
Well, I think, thank you, Linda. I think that's a really interesting question. And I think I cannot provide you with clear-cut answer just now. What I do think in relation to this question is that we should think about the level of personal competences that teachers need to possess, because of course they are a role model. And so I was also thinking of the fact that maybe teachers need to possess a higher level of personal competences than any other citizen. So I think we can be more harsh, I don't know how to say it, on them, because they are a role model. But to say, yeah, they have to reach this level of civic competences, I cannot say that right now. But I do think that the reference framework, the RFCDC developed by the Council of Europe, they identified, how do we call it again? Yeah, they identified proficiency levels. So I think that this could inform us to answer your question, actually, but it's really interesting to reflect upon. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I want to have a last one, if nobody will go for it. Just to take the opportunity that we are here hosted by INVALSI, and INVALSI it's involved in collecting data for Italy with ICCS. And ICCS has a teacher questionnaire. And I know in your work you looked at this, and I think you can have important information in what is being measured. So what kind of information INVALSI it's already providing to teachers and school leaders and so on, and what could be maybe improved and collected in the future. So you can tell us something about that, that would be great. Thank you.
Could you summarize your question?
I will reformulate.
Yes.
So I know that you looked at the ICCS study and what is being asked in the
Yes.
teacher questionnaire. And we know that some dimensions are already collected from your
Yes.
framework, but not other.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want you to say a little bit more about that, like what it's represented. So for teachers now looking at the ICCS data, they will find some information on some aspects, but maybe something it's missing and could be added in future studies.
Okay. So actually you're asking me if what could be added to the teacher questionnaire. Yes, well, actually, then I can maybe elaborate on what on the first question I got, and I think that's this civic education ideology, like how do teachers look at civic education and what does civic education mean for teachers? I think that could be a relevant question that is now not included, and then this also gouges these professional beliefs of teachers. So I think this could be a gap that can be filled in.
Yes, sorry. Thank you very much, Emilie. Thank you all. I think we can conclude this session, and this would leave us some time before lunch to stretch our legs. But I wanted to tell you that later today we'll continue, for those interested in the ICCS study and citizenship competences, we'll have another session at 4:30 here. You know, you will be stuck with me all day. And also the keynote of Dr. Barbara Malak will address the same issues. And with this, I thank you and see you very soon.